The encounter. The sky above the human settlement was a strange shade of violet, the sun barely breaking through thick clouds of dust. The air was heavy, filled with tension as the villagers went about their tasks with nervous glances toward the horizon. Everyone had heard the rumors. The alien enforcer, Alara, was coming. She arrived without warning, her massive shadow casting a chill over the settlement. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, Alara was a figure of power and fear. Her armor shimmered like molten silver, and her deep emerald eyes scanned the crowd with cold precision. She moved with the quiet authority of someone who could crush a life without a second thought. The humans gathered in silence, their whispers dying out as Alara stepped forward. In her hand was a sleek weapon that hummed ominously, a reminder of the destruction she could unleash. "Who is in charge here?" Her voice boomed, resonating like a thunderclap. From the crowd stepped a man, not tall but standing firm. His name was Liam. His brown hair was disheveled, his clothes worn, but his eyes, sharp and steady, met Alara's without flinching. "I am," he said simply. Alara's gaze narrowed. She hadn't expected defiance from such a fragile-looking creature. Humans were known to cower, to beg, yet this one held his ground. Intrigued but unwilling to show it, she raised her weapon slightly. "Your people are accused of stealing from the supply outpost. Resources meant for my kind. Do you deny it?" Liam's jaw tightened, but his voice was calm. "We took what we needed to survive. The storms wiped out our crops. The water is nearly gone. If we didn't act, we would have died." His honesty caught her off guard. Most creatures would grovel or lie, but not him. Alara felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, curiosity. She suppressed it. "Survival does not justify theft," she said coldly, taking a step closer. The crowd recoiled, but Liam remained unmoved. "Then what does justify it?" he asked. His tone wasn't defiant, but it wasn't submissive either. It was a question, genuine and piercing. "If your people were starving, what would you do?" Alara paused. Her people never faced such desperation. Their advanced technology and structured society ensured abundance. Yet his words unsettled her, like a stone dropped into still water. "That is irrelevant," she said, her voice harder now. She couldn't let her authority be questioned. "Your actions have consequences. If I spare you, it will only encourage others to break the law." Liam took a step forward, and the crowd gasped. Standing within arm's reach of the enforcer was unthinkable, yet he showed no fear. "If you kill me," he said, his voice steady, "you'll have to kill us all, because we'll keep fighting to survive. That's what humans do." Alara stared at him, her weapon still raised. She could feel the weight of the crowd's eyes on her, the tension so thick it seemed to hang in the air. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of her weapon. Then something unexpected happened. Alara hesitated. She didn't understand why, but she couldn't bring herself to pull the trigger. Was it the way he looked at her, without hatred or fear, but with determination? Or was it the strange ache in her chest, a sensation she had never felt before? The silence was broken by a child's cry. A small girl clutched her mother's hand, tears streaming down her dirty face. "Please don't hurt us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Alara's eyes flicked to the child, and back to Liam. In that moment, she saw not just a thief but a leader, a protector of his people. It made her question the stories she had been told about humans. Were they really as weak and selfish as her superiors claimed? "You have until sunrise," she said abruptly, lowering her weapon. The crowd erupted in whispers, astonishment and confusion written on their faces. "What happens at sunrise?" Liam asked, his voice cautious but unshaken. "I will return," Alara replied. "You will either prove your innocence or face the consequences." With that, she turned and walked away, her footsteps heavy but her mind heavier. She couldn't explain it, but something about this encounter had unsettled her deeply. For the first time, Alara wasn't sure if her mission was as clear-cut as she had believed. As the crowd watched her leave, Liam exhaled slowly. He didn't know what sunrise would bring, but he knew one thing. They had just been given a chance, however slim, to change their fate. A test of strength. The quiet of the human settlement was unnerving as the sun dipped below the violet horizon, painting the sky in eerie shades of gold and crimson. Liam sat alone near the flickering firelight in the heart of the village, staring at the distant hills where the alien enforcer, Alara, had disappeared hours earlier. Her words, cold and sharp, lingered in his mind. "You will either prove your innocence or face the consequences." He had no idea how to prove anything to someone like her, a being who seemed untouchable, invincible. Yet Liam knew he couldn't let fear rule him. If Alara returned at sunrise with her weapon raised, he would stand again. For his people, he had no other choice. But Alara hadn't gone far. Hidden in the shadows of the hills, she watched. She didn't know why she hadn't left immediately, returning to her command post with the usual report of justice delivered. There was something different about this human, something she couldn't shake. His courage felt unnatural, unsettling. No other species had ever looked at her like that, with defiance that wasn't born of arrogance but necessity. Her communicator buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a sharp, metallic voice, her superior, Commander Voss. "Enforcer Alara, your report is overdue. Have you carried out the punishment?" Alara hesitated. Lying was punishable by death in her society, but her gut told her the truth wouldn't end well either. "Not yet," she replied, her voice steady, but her mind racing. "The situation is complex. I require more time to investigate." "Time is a luxury we cannot afford," Voss snapped. "Humans are resource leeches. Crush them and return." The line went dead, leaving Alara in the heavy silence of her thoughts. Her fingers tightened around her weapon. She could end this quickly. Return, crush the humans, and erase whatever strange feeling Liam had stirred in her. But as her gaze drifted back to the settlement, she found herself descending toward it instead. Liam heard her approach before he saw her. The heavy metallic thud of Alara's boots echoed through the empty paths of the village, drawing nervous glances from those still awake. He stood quickly, his heart pounding but his face calm. "You couldn't wait until sunrise?" he asked, masking his unease with a dry tone. Alara ignored his question. "If your people are innocent, show me proof," she said, her voice sharp. Her tall, armored form seemed even more imposing in the dim light. Liam hesitated, unsure what to say. "We don't have evidence. All we have is what you've already seen. Empty storerooms, dying crops, and starving faces. If that's not enough for you, I don't know what is." "Words are not proof," Alara replied coldly. "You expect me to believe you without evidence, simply because you ask." Her doubt stung, but Liam didn't back down. "I don't care if you believe me. I care that you see us as more than thieves. We're people trying to survive in a world that's been stripped of everything we need. If you think that makes us criminals, then maybe you're the one who's blind." Alara's fist tightened around her weapon. No one spoke to her this way, but instead of anger, she felt something unexpected, a flicker of respect. "You think I don't understand survival," she said, stepping closer. "My people have fought for every inch of the galaxy we now control. Strength is the only language that matters. If you want me to believe you, show me yours." Liam frowned. "What are you saying?" "Prove to me that you're worth saving," she said, raising her weapon slightly. "Fight me." The challenge hung in the air like a thundercloud. The crowd that had gathered gasped, backing away in fear. Liam looked at her, stunned. "You want me to fight you? That's ridiculous. I'm no warrior." "Exactly," Alara said, her tone almost mocking. "But if you can stand against me, even for a moment, I might reconsider my orders." Liam knew he had no chance. She was stronger, faster, and trained for combat. But he also knew she wasn't bluffing. This was his only opportunity to prove something to her, even if it meant risking his life. "Fine," he said, stepping forward. "I'll fight you." The crowd murmured in disbelief as Alara took a step back, her weapon disappearing into a compartment on her armor. "No weapons," she said. "I want to see your strength." They faced each other under the dim light of the settlement's torches. Liam clenched his fists, feeling every pair of eyes on him. He lunged, but Alara dodged easily, her movements smooth and calculated. She didn't strike back immediately, instead observing him, testing him. "You're slow," she said, sidestepping another attempt. "Do you really think this is enough?" Liam gritted his teeth, refusing to give up. He charged again, this time feinting left before throwing his weight into a right hook. Alara caught his fist midair, her grip like iron. She could have crushed him then, but she didn't. "Interesting," she said quietly, almost to herself. "You don't fight for yourself. You fight for them." Her gaze flicked to the crowd. "That's why you don't stop, even when you know you'll lose." Liam pulled back, panting. "What's the point of this?" he demanded. "You already know I can't beat you." Alara released his hand and took a step back. "The point," she said, her voice softer now, "is that you didn't stop trying." She turned and walked away, leaving Liam and the crowd in stunned silence. For the first time, the enforcer wasn't certain who had won the fight, or what it meant. Unlikely alliance. The night had been restless for everyone in the settlement. The encounter between Liam and Alara was the only topic of conversation, whispered from one home to another. The humans didn't know whether to fear her more or to hope that the alien enforcer might spare them. Meanwhile, Liam sat by the fire in his small hut, replaying every moment of their strange fight in his mind. He hadn't won, not even close. Yet something about Alara's expression before she left gave him pause. At first light, she returned. Her silhouette appeared at the edge of the settlement, the rising sun casting a glow against her metallic armor. The villagers froze as they spotted her, mothers clutching their children and men gathering crude tools as weapons. But Alara didn't march in with the same air of authority as before. Instead, she walked purposefully toward Liam's hut, her weapon holstered, her gaze focused. Liam stepped outside to meet her, his face calm but his heart racing. "You're early," he said, crossing his arms. "You don't strike me as someone who likes surprises," she replied. There was a slight edge to her tone, but it lacked the coldness of their earlier encounters. The crowd gathered slowly, keeping their distance but watching intently. Alara turned her attention to them, her towering presence unnerving even from afar. "I came for answers," she said, her voice carrying across the settlement. "I want to see the truth for myself. If you're innocent, prove it, not with words, but with actions." Liam frowned. "What does that mean?" "You've already seen how we live. What more do you want?" "You say you are struggling to survive," Alara said. "Show me. Take me to the places you rely on. Your crops, your water sources, your storage. If you are truly on the brink of collapse, I'll see it with my own eyes." There was murmuring among the villagers. Some whispered that it was a trap, a way for Alara to find more reasons to destroy them. Others thought it was a chance, however small, to make her understand. Liam silenced them with a raised hand. "Fine," he said. "I'll show you everything. But if you see the truth, will you admit you were wrong?" Alara's expression was unreadable. "I'll decide what to do when I've seen enough." The first stop was the settlement's water source, a narrow river wound through the outskirts of the village, its once clear waters now muddy and shallow. Liam crouched by the bank, scooping a handful of water and letting it trickle through his fingers. "This is all we have left. The storms contaminated most of it, and the rest is drying up. We're lucky if it lasts another month." Alara knelt beside him, studying the water with a critical eye. "Your kind hasn't tried purifying it." Liam shook his head. "We don't have the resources or the technology. Every drop we drink is a gamble, but we don't have a choice." She didn't respond, but her silence spoke volumes. For someone from a society where resources were abundant and technology advanced, the desperation of this existence was almost incomprehensible. Next, they walked to the fields. Sparse patches of wilted crops stretched across dry, cracked soil. A few villagers tended to them, their faces weary but determined. One woman wiped sweat from her brow and straightened as they approached, her expression wary. "This is our food supply," Liam said, "or what's left of it. The storms ruined most of the soil, and the seeds we plant barely grow. We ration what little we harvest, but it's never enough." Alara stepped forward, crouching to examine the brittle stalks. "Your people survived centuries of adversity on Earth. How did you lose the ability to grow food?" Liam's jaw tightened. "It's not that simple. This planet isn't Earth. The soil's different, the climate's different, and we don't have the tools we need to adapt. We've been trying to learn, but time isn't on our side." For the first time, Alara looked uncertain. Her people's view of humans had always been one of disdain, seeing them as weak and resource-hungry. Yet, standing here, she saw not weakness but relentless determination. Their final stop was the storage facility, a small, makeshift building where the settlement kept its supplies. Alara stepped inside, scanning the shelves sparsely stocked with dried grains, preserved vegetables, and other necessities. "This is all you have?" "It's all that's left," Liam said, crossing his arms. "And we didn't steal any of it from your people." Alara turned to him, her gaze piercing. "Then who did?" Liam hesitated. He had no proof, only suspicions. "There's another settlement, further south. They're desperate too. It wouldn't surprise me if they took the supplies and let us take the blame." Her eyes narrowed. "Why didn't you say this before?" "Because it doesn't change anything," Liam replied. "If you want to punish someone, you'll find a reason. Whether it's us or them doesn't matter, does it?" Alara stared at him for a long moment. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of responsibility he carried for his people. He wasn't lying. Of that much she was certain. "I'll investigate this other settlement," she said finally. "But if I find out you've hidden the truth from me, there won't be a third chance." Liam nodded. "We don't need a third chance. The truth is all we have." As Alara left the storage facility, her mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. She had come to this planet to enforce justice, to uphold the law. But the more she saw, the more she questioned what justice truly meant. For the first time in her career, Alara wasn't sure if her mission was as black and white as she had been taught. Betrayal. The air in the settlement had become thicker with tension in the days that followed. Word spread of Alara's visit to the water sources, the crops, and the storage facilities. The villagers began to hope, a flicker of belief that perhaps they weren't as doomed as they had thought. But as the days passed without word from the enforcer, a sense of dread grew. Was she still watching? Had she decided to condemn them, or was she truly beginning to understand? Liam, too, felt the weight of uncertainty. Alara had promised to investigate the other settlement, but he knew her people were never ones to act without reason. The longer she took, the more it felt like they were merely waiting for their execution. It was on the 5th day after her visit that Alara returned. The first sign of her arrival was the sudden hum of a hovering ship, sleek, silent, and unmistakably alien. It landed just outside the settlement, kicking up dust as it touched down. A group of soldiers disembarked, their armor reflecting the same cold, unfeeling light as Alara's. At the front of the group stood her superior, Commander Voss. Alara stepped out of the ship shortly after, her posture stiff and military, her face betraying none of the emotion that had been building inside her. She approached Liam without hesitation, her footsteps measured, deliberate. "You've done well to survive this long," she said, her voice a hollow echo of the confidence it once carried. "But your survival is not enough to save you." Liam's heart sank. The tone in her voice told him everything he needed to know. She wasn't here to protect them anymore. "Why?" he asked, barely able to contain the frustration that bubbled in his chest. Why have you come back like this? We told you everything. You saw the truth with your own eyes." Alara's eyes flicked briefly to the soldiers behind her, then back to him. "I've seen enough," she replied. "But the truth you speak isn't the truth I need to hear. My orders were clear. The humans are a threat to the order of the galaxy. I'm here to carry them out." "Then what about the other settlement?" Liam demanded. "What did you find there?" Alara stiffened, her expression faltering for just a moment, before she regained her composure. "The other settlement has nothing to do with this. You're the ones who broke the law, and I will not let you go unpunished." Liam stepped forward, his hands trembling but his voice strong. "You're lying. I told you the truth. You can't just turn your back on everything we've shown you." A brief flicker of something almost human, passed through Alara's eyes. But it was gone before he could fully grasp it. She turned to Vos, who gave a curt nod. "Enforcer Alara, you have your orders." Liam's stomach twisted. He could feel the eyes of the village on him, waiting, hoping for something that would change the course of their fate. But deep down, he knew the truth. There was no more room for hope. The enforcer had made her decision. Then, just as Alara was about to give the command for the soldiers to advance, something unexpected happened. Liam's younger sister, Emma, emerged from the crowd. She was barely 16, but the fire in her eyes was as fierce as any seasoned fighter. She ran toward Alara, her voice shaking but clear. "Please, you can't do this, don't you see? We didn't do anything wrong. We're just trying to survive. We're not your enemies." Alara froze, her gaze narrowing as Emma stopped in front of her, breathing hard. The soldiers behind her shifted uneasily. Liam stepped forward, pulling his sister back. "Emma, stay back," he said, but Emma shook off his hand. "No," she cried, turning back to face the enforcer. "You have to understand. We're not bad people. We just need time." Alara looked at her, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, she slowly reached out a hand toward Emma, not in violence, but in some strange gesture of understanding. The movement was slow, deliberate, like she was trying to reach across a divide she couldn't comprehend. But before she could speak, Vos barked, "Enough." The commander stepped forward, his voice sharp, his expression one of utter disdain. "Enforcer Alara, this is not your mission to decide. You have failed to carry out your orders. You are being relieved of command." Alara's eyes flicked toward Vos, her posture stiffening, her face betraying no emotion. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You've allowed your emotions to cloud your judgment," Vos snapped. "You are no longer fit for this task. Return to the ship. Your actions will be reported to the council." The betrayal hit Alara like a physical blow. She had known that her hesitation could lead to consequences, but hearing Vos' words, so cold and final, shattered something deep within her. She had never questioned her mission before, but now she wasn't sure if it had been right at all. Vos turned to the soldiers. "Prepare to move out. We will deal with these humans as planned." Alara stood motionless, the weight of her failure bearing down on her. For the first time, she realized the true cost of her hesitation. She had given them hope, only to crush it. Before she could make another move, Liam stepped toward her. "If you still have a shred of honor left, you'll stop this. It's not too late to make things right." Alara's gaze met his, and for a moment, time seemed to stretch out between them. She could hear the voices of her people calling for justice, the duty she had sworn to uphold. But she also heard the quiet plea in Liam's words, the truth of their suffering. She had to make a choice. Alara turned sharply, her fist tightening. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low but determined. With that, she strode toward the ship, leaving the villagers in silence. Liam watched her go, the last shred of hope fading as quickly as it had appeared. And yet in his chest, a small seed of defiance began to grow. This was far from over. The breaking point. The morning sun had barely risen when Liam stood at the edge of the settlement, staring out across the barren landscape. The events of the past few days had left him numb, yet his mind buzzed with unanswered questions. What would happen next? What was he supposed to do now? The village was still reeling from the shock of Alara's return and the betrayal they had felt when she sided with her superiors. But one thought lingered in Liam's mind. There had to be a way to change this. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice behind him. "Are you just going to stand there all day?" Liam turned to see his sister, Emma, walking toward him. Her face was set with determination, her eyes fierce, just as they had been when she pleaded with Alara the day before. "I'm thinking," Liam replied, his voice low. "About what comes next." Emma frowned. "And what's next?" "You saw her. She turned her back on us." Liam shook his head. "I'm not giving up. Not yet. She's still our best chance. She's torn. I can feel it. She's not like the others. We can still make her see reason." Emma sighed, clearly unconvinced. "Liam, she was supposed to be our savior. Now she's gone. What's left for us?" He didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. He didn't know what was left. But one thing he was sure of was that he wouldn't just let the settlement fall. There had to be a way. And if Alara wouldn't help them, then they would have to fight on their own. Days passed, and the settlement had begun to prepare for the worst. Tensions rose as the villagers, once united by survival, now debated their future in hushed conversations. Some believed they should give in to Alara's demands, hoping to live another day. Others, more defiant, argued that they had nothing left to lose. Liam had spent most of his time with the village's leaders, planning a desperate countermeasure. If they could somehow disable the alien ships or sabotage the supply lines, they might have a chance to fight back. But the plan was risky, too risky. If they failed, they would all be wiped out. And yet there was a nagging feeling in his gut, a feeling that they weren't finished. Late one evening, when the settlement had grown quiet, Liam stood at the entrance of his hut, looking out toward the distant hills. It was then that he saw the flash of movement. A figure, cloaked in the shadows of the twilight, was making its way toward him. It was Alara. She had returned. Liam's heart raced as she drew closer, her tall form unmistakable against the dying light. Her armor gleamed faintly, but her posture was different, no longer rigid and commanding, but uncertain, almost fragile. "Liam," she said quietly, her voice hoarse. He didn't know what to say. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. "I didn't come to fight," Alara continued, her eyes downcast. "I came to understand." Liam's mind whirled. She had come back. After everything. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions, to demand answers, but all he could manage was a simple, "Why?" "I couldn't do it," Alara said, her voice tinged with regret. "I was sent here to wipe you all out, but I saw something in you, Liam. Something human. Something I couldn't ignore." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with pain and conflict. "I don't know what it is, but I know I can't just let you die." Liam felt the weight of her words. He had expected anger, fear, or even betrayal, but not this. He wasn't sure whether to trust her, whether to believe her. She had already made her choice once. What had changed? "You betrayed us," Liam said, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "You turned your back on us when we needed you most." "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "And I'll never forgive myself for it. But I'm here now, and I'm asking for a chance to make it right." Liam stood motionless, struggling with the emotions surging inside him. Anger, betrayal, hope, fear. It was all too much. Yet despite everything, he couldn't shake the feeling that Alara was different from the others. "How do I know you're not lying?" he asked. "How do I know you won't just turn us over to Vos and his soldiers the moment you leave?" Alara's eyes filled with a sorrow he hadn't expected. "I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'm here because I believe you. I believe in what you're fighting for." Liam felt his anger ebb slightly, replaced by confusion. Why? Why do you care? You don't owe us anything." "Maybe not," Alara said softly, "but you remind me of something I've forgotten. You remind me that there's more to life than following orders. That survival isn't just about power. It's about protecting what matters. And I'm not going to let that die. Not when I can help." For a long time, Liam said nothing. He studied her, looking for any sign that she was playing some kind of game, trying to deceive him again. But all he saw was sincerity, a rare honesty in her eyes. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I'll give you a chance. But you'll have to prove it. No more lies. No more hesitation." Alara's expression softened, and for the first time, she seemed at peace. "I'll prove it, Liam. I swear it." As the two of them stood there in the quiet night, the weight of their shared decision settled between them. The battle was far from over. But for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. And perhaps, just perhaps, the human spirit had found an unlikely ally in the unlikeliest of places. The final stand. The days following Alara's return were filled with a tense uncertainty. The villagers worked together, secretly preparing for what they feared would come, a battle that could very well be their last. Liam, Alara, and a small group of trusted leaders began to form an unlikely alliance, planning in hushed tones, using the cover of darkness to avoid detection. They had no choice. With the alien forces on their doorstep, and Va's promise of retribution hanging over their heads, they needed a plan, and fast. Alara was the key to their survival, but even with her strength and knowledge, it was a fragile hope. Her loyalty had been torn once before. Now, as the human settlement braced itself for an impending attack, Alara's past and her future collided in a moment of agonizing uncertainty. Would she fight alongside the humans or side with her people, following the call of duty that had always defined her? The morning of the battle arrived with a sky heavy with the promise of rain. The clouds, dark and oppressive, seemed to mirror the gravity of the situation. The humans had set up makeshift barricades, using whatever materials they could find to fortify their village. The gates were reinforced, the streets cleared, and the settlement was ready for whatever came next. Alara stood at the outskirts of the settlement, her eyes scanning the horizon, her posture tense. Beside her, Liam adjusted the crude weapon in his hand, a rifle made from scavenged parts. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. "They're coming," Alara said, her voice low, as she gazed into the distance. Liam followed her gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. "How do you know?" "They're never subtle," she replied, the corners of her lips curling into a faint, almost bitter smile. "And I've seen their tactics before." He nodded, though his insides were anything but calm. His people had nothing to fight with except their will to survive. The enemy, on the other hand, had advanced weapons, ships, and the unyielding discipline of a military force. The ground shook as the first of the enemy ships appeared on the horizon, cutting through the sky with a menacing hum. There were more than 20 of them, sleek and dark, each one carrying soldiers, weapons, and enough firepower to level the entire settlement. Liam's stomach clenched at the sight. "They'll make their move soon," Alara said, turning to face him. "And when they do, we won't have long to react." "We're ready," Liam said, though his voice betrayed his doubt. "We have to be." The two of them stood in silence, the weight of their situation sinking in. For a moment, it felt as though time had stopped. But then, as the sound of engines grew louder and the ships drew closer, the moment of reckoning arrived. The enemy forces landed in the center of the settlement, their armored soldiers flooding into the village streets, their footsteps heavy and resolute. The humans had positioned themselves strategically, but their defenses were no match for the firepower the aliens brought. As the first shots rang out, the ground exploded in a barrage of fire, sending debris flying. Liam dove behind the nearest barricade, his heart racing as the crack of gunfire echoed around him. Beside him, Alara moved with practiced precision, her weapons drawn, her movements fluid and deadly. She had fought many battles, but this one felt different, personal. "You have to hold the line," Alara shouted to the villagers, her voice commanding as she opened fire on the advancing soldiers. "We can't let them break through." Liam nodded, rallying the others, trying to keep their spirits up as the enemy closed in. He fired his weapon, the recoil sending a sharp tremor through his arms. He didn't care. The only thing that mattered was keeping his people alive. Alara fought alongside him, her incredible strength and combat expertise turning the tide of several skirmishes. She was a force to be reckoned with, her speed and accuracy unmatched by anyone in the settlement. But even with her formidable presence, the alien forces pressed forward. Their numbers were overwhelming. Liam caught a glimpse of Vos standing at the front of his forces, his face expressionless, his eyes cold. "We need to take him down," Liam said through gritted teeth. "I'm on it," Alara replied, her voice steady as she moved toward the front lines, cutting a path through the enemy with lethal precision. As the battle raged on, Liam felt the tide of hope begin to shift. The humans were fighting with everything they had, but it wasn't enough. The enemy was too organized, too powerful. Their numbers were endless. Then, as if by some miracle, a loud explosion shook the ground beneath them. The sound was deafening, and for a moment, everything went still. The shockwave knocked Liam off his feet, and when he looked up, he saw a plume of smoke rising from the heart of the enemy lines. Alara had done it. She had planted explosives along the enemy supply lines, cutting off their reinforcements and throwing their entire operation into chaos. But it wasn't over yet. With a sudden roar, Vos charged forward, his soldiers regrouping and preparing for one final push. He was close now, close enough for Liam to see the fury in his eyes, the determination to crush them all. Liam grabbed his rifle, his mind set. This was it. There was no turning back. Alara appeared beside him, her eyes focused and filled with an unspoken resolve. "We finish this now," she said, her voice unwavering. Together, they charged toward the enemy, dodging fire, their bodies moving as one. With every step, they fought not just for survival, but for something more, something worth fighting for. Liam faced Vos, his rifle raised, his body tense. "This ends today," he shouted. Vos smirked, the confidence of his superiority apparent. "You think you've won, human. You are nothing but ants beneath our boot." Alara's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Not anymore." With a sudden, swift move, Alara disarmed Vos, knocking his weapon from his grasp. She didn't hesitate. With a powerful strike, she knocked Vos to the ground, pinning him under her boot. The enemy forces hesitated, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Liam and Alara stood side by side, the battle now tipping in their favor. The remaining soldiers began to retreat, unwilling to face the fury of the humans and their unexpected ally. The final stand had been fought, and the tide had turned. The humans, against all odds, had won. But even in victory, there was no celebration. There was only the quiet, exhausted relief of knowing that they had survived, together. A new beginning. The aftermath of the battle was a strange kind of quiet. The roar of gunfire had faded, replaced by the distant sounds of soldiers retreating and the slow, painful groans of the village. The settlement had been badly damaged, but the humans had won. They had fought back against an enemy that had seemed unstoppable, and in doing so, they had proved something even more valuable than survival. They had proven their strength, their unity, and their will to protect what mattered most. Liam stood among the wreckage, his face grim as he surveyed the village. The dust still hung in the air, the smoke from the burning ships lingering like a dark cloud. His clothes were torn, his body bruised and exhausted, but it didn't matter. They had won. Alara stood beside him, her tall frame a stark contrast against the destruction. Her armor was dented, the silver sheen dulled by the battle, but there was something in her expression, something that had shifted. She no longer looked like the cold, calculating enforcer who had once towered over the humans with disdain. Now her eyes reflected the same exhaustion and determination that Liam felt. They had fought together, side by side, and they had both changed in ways neither of them fully understood. "You did it," Liam said, his voice low but filled with quiet awe. "We did it." Alara nodded, her gaze shifting across the wreckage. "It's not enough," she said softly. "We've won this battle, but the war is far from over." Liam turned to face her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "The enemy is retreating. Vos is gone. We've beaten them." "I'm talking about something bigger," Alara said, her voice tinged with regret. "Vos was only one part of the problem. There are many more like him. Those who see humanity as nothing more than a resource to be controlled, a species to be dominated. You've won today, but there's still a galaxy out there that doesn't see you as equals. You're still seen as weak, expendable." Liam felt the weight of her words. She was right. They had won a small victory. But the galaxy didn't change overnight. But he also knew something else. Their victory had proven that humans weren't as powerless as others had believed. It had proven that, even against overwhelming odds, they could rise up and fight back. And that made all the difference. "You think we can't handle it?" Liam asked, his voice steady. "You've seen us fight. You've seen what we're capable of." Alara's eyes softened as she looked at him. "I've seen it," she said, "and I've learned from it. But you'll need more than just courage to survive what's coming. You'll need allies. You'll need to show the galaxy what humanity can really do." For a moment, they both stood in silence, contemplating the future. The sound of footsteps broke the stillness, and Liam turned to see Emma approaching, her face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "You're alive," she said, her voice almost in disbelief. "You made it." Liam smiled faintly, his exhaustion catching up with him. "Yeah, we made it." Emma glanced at Alara, her gaze skeptical. "And her?" Liam didn't have an immediate answer, but Alara stepped forward, her posture unyielding. "I'm not here to be your enemy anymore," she said, her voice firm. "I'm here to help. I know I've made mistakes, but this is where it changes. You've shown me something I thought was long gone, something worth fighting for." There was a long pause before Emma spoke again, her tone softer. "I guess that's all we can ask for." As the days passed, the settlement began to rebuild. It wasn't easy. Supplies were scarce, and the damage to the infrastructure would take months, if not years, to repair. But the people worked together, their hands and hearts united in a common purpose. For the first time, they weren't just surviving, they were thriving. The enemy had come and gone, but in their wake, they had left something more important, a new sense of hope. Liam, Emma, and the other leaders of the settlement began to form plans for the future, working alongside Alara to make sure their resources would be protected, their defenses strengthened. Alara had become an invaluable ally, her knowledge of alien technology and strategy proving essential in fortifying the settlement's defenses. But even more than that, her presence was a symbol. She was a reminder that sometimes even the most unyielding enemies could change. Even the most cold-hearted warriors could find a reason to fight for something greater than themselves. One evening, as the stars began to twinkle above the village, Liam stood at the edge of the settlement, looking out into the vast unknown. The horizon stretched on forever, endless and full of possibilities. There was still so much to be done, so much to fight for. But for the first time, in a long while, he wasn't afraid of what the future held. Alara walked up beside him, her gaze following his. "The galaxy is a big place," she said quietly, "and there are many battles to fight. But now, you have a chance. You've proven that humanity isn't weak. You've proven that you can stand against the odds. And I'll stand by you." Liam smiled, his heart filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "We'll fight together, all of us. And one day, the galaxy will know what humanity can do." Alara nodded. "Together, we can change the course of history." And as the two of them stood side by side, staring into the distance, Liam knew that this was just the beginning. The war for humanity's place in the galaxy wasn't over, but with allies like Alara, they had a fighting chance. And that was more than enough to start building a new future.